Doc Thompson on Talk Radio 1270. Joining me now is the former governor of New Mexico and Libertarian candidate for president, Gary Johnson. How are you, sir?
I'm great. Great to be on. Thanks.
No, great to have you back on. First of all, before we get into some of the other specifics going on in the world and how we solve some of these problems, what's the latest on you on the ballot in Michigan? Is that not going to happen now?
No, I have to believe that it will.
Okay.
It's Republicans keeping me off the ballot. That's just the bottom line. I mean, and I don't know if you saw this, but the Libertarian Party is still a party that's on the ballot, and as a backup plan, we were going to run Gary E. Johnson from Austin, Texas, as opposed to myself,
right.
Gary E. Johnson from Taos, New Mexico. And the courts ruled we couldn't do that. Tell me how any of this is fair in any way whatsoever.
No, it's not. And if he meets the requirements, of course they could or should let him on.
Well, they should. And I would like to point out, I'm on the ballot in 47 states and the District of Columbia. We're litigated in the other three. And, of course, one of those three is Michigan, the other Pennsylvania, the other Oklahoma.
Can they still write you in Michigan? If you don't make it,
but write-ins really are not an option. The Libertarian Party is on the ballot.
Okay.
And we believe that the Libertarian Party will have Gary E. Johnson as their candidate.
Gary, this is what frustrates me so much. This is what frustrates me. There are a lot of people, Democrat, Republican, that claim, this moral high ground in different issues you're talking about. But when it comes to something as simple as elections like this, they play these stupid games. Of course you should be on the ballot. And it's not because I support a lot of, libertarian ideas and values. I would say the same thing if it were the Green Party candidate or anybody else.
Well, and I'll tell you that there's no hypocrisy on my end either. As governor of New Mexico, there was plenty of legislation that passed that made it easier to be on the ballot. I signed that legislation. You know what? There was legislation that was going to make it harder to get on the ballot as a third party. I vetoed that kind of legislation because it's not right. This should be about open debate and discussion on really important issues that are facing this country.
So what can we do before we change the topic here? What can Michiganders do to get you on the ballot or help out or pay attention to the campaign?
I would just say letters to the editor and just outrage over what has happened will go a long way. Voting everybody that's responsible for this out of office would go a long way toward making this never happen again. And I think that would be the Secretary of State. I think that would be the Attorney General. Everybody who stepped in and made this very political as opposed to an open process, which is what we kid ourselves into thinking we have.
Yeah, sadly. And I think more and more people are starting to realize that, too. They're starting to realize what we have.
And there's some really big issues facing this country. The notion of the fact that we're in a state of perpetual war, that we militarily intervene in other countries' affairs, which result in hundreds of millions of enemies to this country that maybe we wouldn't have but for our military interventions. Our police state is growing. It's not contracting. It's growing. Drones. And we find ourselves in a state of unsustainable debt and spending that can only be addressed by balancing the federal budget. And we need to do that now, not 28 years from now, not burying our heads in the sand and expecting Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny to still come.
It's funny. I just saw a story, and you may have seen this. Ross Perot, after 20 years, has come out and started talking. I think he wrote a book. When he raised the fiscal alarms in 1992, just 20 years ago, Gary, the national debt was $4 trillion. It's $16 trillion now. We had a record deficit that year of $290 billion, and consistently for 4 years, it's been over $1 trillion.
Well, and what Ross Perot talked about, and what is coming due, is the fact that it's unavoidable. We have an interest expense on the debt that we have. And when we are statistically 4 years away from being Greece, don't you think it's time that we actually address these issues? And I'll just offer up a prediction. Romney, Obama elected, just a lot more of the same. And what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results? Well, we've just gone insane in this country.
Talking with Gary Johnson, the former New Mexico governor, Libertarian presidential candidate. Give people an idea of what the Libertarian Party is about, what you believe, and the reason you would make a good president.
Okay, so what you're not going to hear in the debate on this Wednesday is, I don't want to bomb Iran. I want to get out of Afghanistan and bring the troops home tomorrow. I think that marriage equality is a constitutionally guaranteed right on par with civil rights of the 60s. I want to end the drug war, legalize marijuana now, repeal the Patriot Act. I would have never signed the National Defense Authorization Act. Let's balance the federal budget now. I'm promising to submit a balanced budget to Congress in the year 2013. That means addressing Medicaid, Medicare, military spending. And then when it comes to jobs, look, I'm the only candidate that's proposing to eliminate income tax, corporate tax, abolish the IRS, and replace all of it with one federal consumption tax. I think it really reboots the American economy for the next 100 years, that if in a zero corporate tax rate environment, the private sector doesn't create tens of millions of jobs, I don't know what it takes to create tens of millions of jobs. Obama, Romney debating right now over who's going to add more spending to Medicare. And we have to slash Medicare spending. We all know it, and yet this is what we're supposed to have a debate on come Wednesday night.
And Gary, I had a question for you. This is Boz, by the way. I just wanted to ask you, I heard you bring up when it came to marriage equality, having it be on par with civil rights of the 60s. Being a younger guy, would you be able to, I don't know, maybe just expand on that just a little bit for some of us that weren't around in the 60s?
Well, just if you're going to leave this issue to the states, effectively 42 states have said that marriage is between a man and a woman. And at the top of the list for President of the United States is governing under strict adherence to the United States Constitution. So I think that under the 14th Amendment, equal protection clause, that gay individuals are entitled to marry should they so choose. And I would put that on par with civil rights of the 60s. Would we still have segregated bathrooms today in the South? Would we still have slavery today, but for the federal government saying that this is a constitutional issue and stepping in and asserting themselves? I think this is one of those federal issues that is constitutional where the federal government needs to assert itself.
Governor Johnson, we've had a lot of stories recently about welfare reform and people abusing welfare. In fact, just over this past weekend, there was a lottery winner who had continued to collect welfare stamps. She was just found dead on Sunday. What types of things would you do to help overhaul the welfare system? I mean, we know about the Lifeline program that we're spending $1.6 billion on cell phones for people who are low income and on welfare. What are some of the really important things, and how would you take a look at our welfare system to really make it better?
Well, the only way we're going to address this is to devolve these programs completely to the states. So Medicaid and Medicare, the federal government needs to get out of the business completely. They need to devolve it to the states, reduce the spending by 43%. As governor of New Mexico, if the federal government would have block granted the state of New Mexico 43% less money, done away with all the strings and the mandates, I believe I could have effectively overseen the delivery of health care to the poor in New Mexico. Medicaid, I think you need to apply that same model to Medicare, devolve it to the states, reduce the amount of money spent so that we spend within the money that we are collecting, balanced budget, and I think we will have some fabulous success that will get emulated. I also think we'll have some terrible failure that will get avoided. But the notion of Washington top-down, Washington knows best, whoa, we're spending, $2 billion a year on cell phones? Does anybody think that comes in line with providing for those truly in need? I don't think so.
No,
I certainly find a single person.
No, I don't think so either. And, Gary, I always look at it when it comes to the federal government saying, we're going to take a bunch of money in from all the states, all the individuals, and then they redistribute it to the states with strings attached is ridiculous. If they stop doing that, you would have more money at the state level, and the people would pay less in taxes because there's always a handling charge at the federal level. You're
absolutely right, and that's exactly what applies to education. Federal Department of Education, established in 1979 under Jimmy Carter, what has been value added since 1979 when it comes to education. And what people don't understand is federal government gives you 11 cents out of every school dollar that every state spends. They say, we're going to give you 11 cents. You need to do A, B, C, and D. Well, you do A, B, C, and D, and it costs you 16 cents. It's a negative to take federal money.
Gary, do you think that we should be drug testing welfare recipients?
No, I don't. I don't think we should be. First of all, I think we should bring an end to the drug war. And when it comes to drug testing, test away for anybody who is impaired and may put themselves in a position to do harm to others, like driving under the influence. But one of the big issues with drug testing is that it doesn't test for impairment. In the case of marijuana, it just tests for the presence of marijuana. And a lot of these people are dealing with their lives like other people deal with their lives by taking drinks in the evening. I'm in the camp that believes that 90% of the drug problem is prohibition-related, not use-related. That's not to discount the problems with use and abuse, but citizens of Denver 6 years ago voted to decriminalize marijuana on a campaign based on marijuana being safer than alcohol. So I'm going to argue that people that smoke pot are maybe taking a safer alternative than drinking, but it's okay to drink, but it's not okay to smoke marijuana. We're going to allow drinkers to collect welfare, but not marijuana smokers. It's just terribly, terribly unfair.
Well, and there's a hypocrisy that goes along with it, but there's also a lack of common sense. I agree with you, Gary. Listen, I have maybe a glass or two of wine or a beer or two a month. I'm not a big drinker. I don't smoke pot. I don't abuse of prescription drugs or anything like that. And I'll stand with you each and every day to say that people ought to have that right, provided they're not infringing upon somebody else's rights, like driving a car while under the influence.
Right. Yeah, no, you're right on. I mean, no argument whatsoever. That ought to be the...
Do you smoke, Gary? Do you smoke pot?
I have. I've smoked pot. I've drank. I don't drink today. I don't smoke marijuana, but based on my experience, in no category is marijuana more dangerous than alcohol.
Why did you quit both of those, just out of curiosity? And how long ago was that?
Well, I haven't had a drink of alcohol in over 25 years. And when it comes to marijuana, I've actually smoked marijuana recently in my life. It had to do with a horrible paragliding accident that I had, that I was faced with either taking legal prescription drugs, which I find to be horrible, or smoking marijuana. And, I was in a situation where doctors told me that I would never recover. I have recovered. I've been recovered now for over 4 years. So I smoked marijuana over a 3-year period where I had broken my back, where I had lost 1.5 inches of height because of compression of my vertebrae in my back.
When was your accident? Where was it? Were you paragliding in New Mexico?
I was actually paragliding in Hawaii, in Maui. I took up the sport. I just found it to be unbelievably fun. And in retrospect, it was a sport that did not scare me. I was going to fly to the sun, and on this particular morning, it was my fault. I was at fault. I took off and flew into trees that for 2 weeks I'd been flying over, and I ended up falling basically a straight 50 feet after my wings stalled. I broke my back, ACL separation, broken ribs.
When was that?
About me was a mess.
When was that?
That was in 2005.
All right. So, by the way, did you hear the clip that was making the rounds from the morning show in Albuquerque when the president called in, kind of, for an interview? Did you hear that clip?
No, I didn't.
Oh, this was out about a month ago, and it made the rounds on all the talk shows and whatever. The president seemingly, called into this local morning show in Albuquerque, an FM, music station, to be interviewed and, to kind of give that I'm hip with the young people type thing. And then as we turned out, because, my producer Skip, of course, was, familiar with those people. He worked with them in Albuquerque, that it was all set up ahead of time and recorded and whatever. It was really pretty interesting, Gary, but you'll love one of the big questions they asked him was red or green? Red or green? And the president actually, he answers it, which there's no way if you're not from New Mexico that you would know what the hell someone was talking about just by saying red or green, which shows the whole thing was planned.
Which does suggest that the whole thing is planned. And the issues facing this country are just too big to go to red or green. Like I say, Romney, Obama debating over who's going to spend more money on Medicare. We have to slash Medicare. We have to slash federal spending. We need to stop with our military interventions. I'm just afraid none of this is going to get talked about come Wednesday night. No, you're right. I'm looking forward to the interview. Not to mention the fact that he answered red, so he's out of it, Gary. If he mentioned red, not green.
See, Governor, it would have been nice if he had said Christmas style. Then he would have really been in, right?
Right, Christmas style. All right, former New Mexico. What's that?
I just say that's the indicator. If he answered red when you have the green chili that we have,
right? Exactly.
Man, that was all pre-canned.
Absolutely. All right, former New Mexico Governor Gary Johnson and Libertarian candidate for president. I appreciate it, sir. Thanks as always.
Thank you guys for having me on.
Have yourself a good day. Let's go to Chris and Troy. You're at Talk Radio 1270. How are you?
Good, Mr. Thompson. How you doing?
I'm doing well. I wish I had seen your call there a little bit earlier. I would have put you on with Gary.
I actually just called 2 seconds ago, but yeah, I'm actually going to vote for him.
Really? What issue do you think overall is it the general libertarian philosophy, or is there something where you're like that guy has it?
No, right. It's that guy has it. Ron Paul, as a libertarian, scared the crap out of me.
Why? What's the difference? So what's the two?
Well, first of all, Gary Johnson about his marriage equality, I think he's dead on. Ron Paul was more of a leave it to the states kind of guy. And Gary Johnson was, it's the federal government's job to step in and protect civil rights constitutionally.
See, that's the one place that I differ with Gary, and I don't have a problem if the homotype sexuals get married. I don't have a problem with it.
Me either, and that's actually not the biggest issue facing me. I'm really sick.
I'm just
friends out of work.
That's just a good topic though, because he brought it up. My thing is, I don't think the state should, or the federal government should be saying anyways, I don't think the state should be telling people who should get married.
No, and I agree with you on that. I don't think it's a state issue. I think if you're going to give benefits to people, heterosexual couples for getting married, that homosexual couples should get the same benefits.
Yeah, it's amazing that the fact that whether or not the gays can marry is even a question of debate right now.
So what else, Chris? What else makes you say Gary's the guy?
First of all, we're $16 trillion in debt. The budget needs to be balanced. I've read Gary's bio. I've gone through everything he did in New Mexico, and he left the state fiscally sound. He balanced the budget. He kept the programs going. And I was just very impressed by him, by his bio. I couldn't find one negative thing online about him. Not one scandal he was involved in, not one thing where nothing negative. The only thing I'm not sure about is the consumption tax, but I just don't know enough about it.
You know what's funny though, Chris? This is what's like. You and I have had differences. We've caught up into had issues where we don't agree on a lot of stuff, and yet we both can agree on a huge portion of Gary Johnson.
Most of everything he said, man.
Which is why I believe that there are more Americans that have a libertarian philosophy than the other two parties.
But I think the Ron Paul being the libertarian man of the hour for the past couple of elections, I think Ron Paul's very scary.
Well, what about it though? You said scary. There's only one part of Ron Paul that I have a problem with, but I want to hear your thoughts. What's scary?
First of all, Ron Paul brings religion into a lot of his stuff. Ron Paul, the pro-life issue is a religious issue to him. It's the sanctity of life, when life starts. But because of his religion, that's where his views come from. Also, the comment he made in the debate about someone being sick and if they needed to go to the hospital, well, they should have purchased insurance earlier. But, I mean, that's just not reality. People can't always afford insurance. And Medicaid programs and Medicare programs, I want to be there to help people, but I want them to be fiscally sound. I want them to be sustainable for generations to come.
See, and that's and I understand what you're saying there. The problem is, and this is why I tell you, Chris, go read the newspapers in England, read the ones in Canada, and you'll recognize that you can never truly make that fiscally sound as a government if you're providing certain services, whatever program you're calling it, even if it's Obamacare, because there are some people that are not going to get the services because we don't have enough money for it. The only problem I had with Ron Paul was the extreme nature of his foreign policy. Gary said we shouldn't be invading other countries, we shouldn't be taking all those things, and he's right. Unless we are truly threatened, we should have no part in any of that. And let's be honest, Afghanistan, Iraq, most of that was bogus. Even a good portion of Afghanistan. It was not smart, and it was bogus, and we know that. My problem with Ron Paul was, though, shutting down all of the bases. We still need to have bases around the world. We still need to protect America away from America. I agree, let's shut down a bunch of them. Let's scale them back. And I agree that when it comes to the Defense Department, oh yeah, they can get a serious haircut as well. There's a lot of misspending and overspending. Ron was just a little too extreme when it came to that. As far as his views being based in religion, I don't care where they're based as long as your views are under the blanket of freedom and personal responsibility and personal liberties. I don't care whether or not it comes from religion where you're concerned.
Yeah, it is silly to think that the U.S. government doesn't need to protect its foreign interests abroad, because it does. One of the things about Gary Johnson, one of the biggest selling points for me, is that while during his tenure as governor, he vetoed more legislation than the other 49 governors combined. And that is the job. That's what he needs to do, is to take the crap that's being put out there and say no. Focus on things that are important and don't send stuff to my desk that's unimportant.
Think about it. If a president or a governor vetoes a lot of stuff, what does that mean? Are they being difficult? No, unless it's just right the way they want it. No, it's forcing their state legislature or the Congress to make sure they have enough people that think it's good to override it, or it forces them to go back and rework it. Either way, it's forcing good legislation. It's not a president or a governor vetoing legislation because it's not perfect the way I want it. No. In fact, we always hear gridlock is bad. What's a gridlock? Gridlock is good.
Yeah, BS.
At this point in America, we should have reached most of the legislation passed that needs to be passed.
Doug Thompson.